Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Conversations with Ola today. This is a space for real talk about life choices, growth, direction, career, and business. No scripts over here, no pressure, just honest conversations between people who are figuring things out, building, learning, and becoming better every day. Today, we have a wonderful person on the show today, Dr. Yemi Adeyiga. I think I've just known a doctor for like 2 years now, but he's made he might not know this, but he's made some impact on me as a person. And so I just wanted to learn about his journey. And so I hope that, myself and everyone who's going to be watching this show will be able to take, a few lessons from his journey and, hopefully we'll make better decisions going forward. So you're welcome, Dr. Yemi Adeyiga. I'll give it back to you to tell us who Dr. Yemi is. Who is Dr. Yemi?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share my journey with your viewers. Like you rightly said, my name is Yemi Adeyiga, and I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. My parents are originally from Ogun State, a place called Ishara Remo. That's a town after Ishagam in North local government, but they lived in Lagos. My parents been living in Lagos now for over 60 years. So we were born in Lagos. I grew up in the Ilupeju area of Lagos. So that's Mushin local government. So I brag to people that I'm Mushin. I'm from Mushin local government. Most of my childhood period was spent, in Ilupeju. Then we moved down to Onike area of Lagos by the University of Lagos, second gate by Mountain of Fire.
Okay.
So I later grew up over there, by the second gate of the University of Lagos. And so I describe myself, as lover of people, lover of God. I love the Lord. I'm not perfect or anything, but I love God because I believe that there is nothing anyone can accomplish here on earth without God's help. And so having that understanding make me describe myself as somebody who loves the Lord. And then because you love the Lord, then you have no choice but to love people that God created.
Awesome. True.
So I love people, most especially people who are coming from marginalized environment or community. By marginalized, I mean individuals who are coming from no means, individuals who have low socioeconomics, individuals whose parents are not well educated. I believe that, we can be instruments to help those individuals also achieve God's plan for their lives. And I'm also a lover of knowledge. I love to share knowledge because I believe that the difference between those who are successful in life and those who are not is the level of information they have. And so I describe myself as an individual who likes to share information and impart knowledge. And so I think in a nutshell, that's how I would describe myself. And of course, I'm married, so I'm a husband, and I'm a father. And I believe those are my identities,
Awesome.
but more
Okay.
importantly, I describe myself, as a Nigerian American as opposed to an African American or a Black American. I describe myself as a Nigerian American because those identifiers are very important to me, both Nigerian and my American identity. So
Oh,
that's who I am.
I heard you say something, and the summary for me is that you have a soft spot for people who come from, allow me to use the word backgrounds,
Mm,
people who were raised with little means.
mm,
Why is that?
mm,
I'm going to tie that to the next question, and you can tie, both. I'm going to ask, two questions. Why do you
mm,
have a soft spot for people who come from, that background, that kind of background?
mm,
And does it have anything to do with, your own background? And so that's going
mm.
to lead us to me asking about life, what life looked like for you when you were growing up. Were you raised,
Right.
a rich background? Were you a Nepo baby in Nigerian
Mm,
parents? Or were you a
mm.
rich kid, the way we would describe it in Nigeria? So what was growing up like for you, and why, if you're able to link that with, why you have a soft spot for, people with lower means of.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think it's very important. And you ask a beautiful question, the why. And so for me, I think it tied to my upbringing, really. See, we did not grow up with a lot of money. Like they would say where I came from, Ayo, ABO power, right? We're just comfortable. We did not grow up with a lot of money. I mean, in the beginning, it was good, and then my father lost his job, and so it was now only my mother's income. My mom was a nurse, and so we then grew up on only one income. And that's a family of seven. So I have four siblings growing up
Oh,
and surviving on only one income for a very long time. So that was really challenging. So I'm a product of grace, right? And so when you enjoy the grace of God, right, then you have no choice but to go back and give back, right? To those people that look like you, because you can relate and, right, you understand what it means, not to have, right? And you also know what it means to have,
sure.
right? So then it then makes sense to now say, look, I see your struggles. I understand, the barriers, that this low socioeconomics can create for people. And then how can we remove these barriers, based on the grace that I have received, and then be able to say, look, I was just like you 35 years ago, but see where grace has brought me. So if I can become Dr. Yemi, even where I came from, in the intro, I said my local government was Mushin local government. Me and my friend, Dr. Dudubo, used to live here in Oklahoma too. We went to the same primary school. We've been friends for 42 years now. He's a doctor now in Canada. So he used to go to RCCG in Oklahoma City. And we used to, describe ourselves as people who went to Jack on Day school, right? And we went. So the elementary school that I went to is called Christ Center Primary School in Ilupeju, you know. That's Jack on Day school. So I did not go to St. John's College, over there in Pangrove. So I really understand what it means, to have mega resources. And that really make me, to want to work with individuals, who are coming from that background, right? Because I see the connection, between socioeconomics, right? And mental health. In fact, that's really my research area, right? I see the connections and how do we bridge the gap, right? Such that the low socioeconomics does not necessarily have to impact people's mental health.
Okay.
And that's really what drive me to that.
We'll get to that point where we dissect, your career path really. But for someone who really does not know you and is just learning about you for the very first time, I have encountered people who did not really come from a poor background. But I mean, life is in stages, right?
Mm,
Millionaires, when they are speaking to billionaires, would say, "Hey, I suffered," because
mm,
I mean, you're speaking to someone who is, higher rank
mm,
financially to you. When
mm,
someone who is a millionaire is speaking to someone who, was raised on a couple of thousands or hundreds
mm,
of thousands, the guy, on the hundreds of thousands whose parents bought him a Toyota would be
mm,
speaking to a guy whose parents bought him a Lamborghini that, look, I'm
mm,
suffering right now. You know,
mm,
I wish I could have a Lamborghini like you. So I'm suffering, The Toyota guy whose parents bought him a Toyota vehicle, when he's speaking to a guy whose parents bought him a bicycle, will say, "Hey,
yes.
look, we suffered, man. We had nothing because I
Mm,
mean, you can imagine my dad just bought me, a bicycle."
mm,
And so there's hierarchy when it comes to financial status in society. How would you, and really, this is not an interview. We're not interviewing. We just want to, dissect, this is
mm,
conversations again. And we're just like
right.
two friends speaking. What
Mm,
indeed was, your childhood like? If you're
mm,
asking me, my child, for example, I'm the first of four kids. Okay.
mm,
And I remember that my mom at one time was a teacher. And
mm,
because she was teaching, I was describing this to a friend one day, how my childhood was like. And I'm going to explain it to you. So we lived about 45 minutes walk away from
mm,
my school. And so we'll
mm,
walk in the morning for 45 minutes to my school.
Mm.
And then it was just myself and my younger sister at the time. My mom would,
Right.
back my younger sister, and then
Mm.
we'll walk to school. And so my primary school, I remember, it was back in the day when we had Ghanaian teachers.
Mm.
A lot of them were in Nigeria before the Ghana must go situation. My primary school teacher was a Ghanaian, right? And then, we'll walk to school in the morning and we had to go home. So school starts at 7:30 in the morning. The teachers had to be on the grounds, school grounds by 7:30 in the morning. Classes will start at maybe 8:45 after the assembly session. And so we get to school at 7:30 in the morning, and then school closes at 3.
Mm.
And this is like elementary school
Mm.
or primary Nigerian primary school. School closes at 3, and then we'll do extra classes from 3 to 5. All right,
Mm.
and then as a kid, I'm just 4 or 5 years old. Because I
Mm.
mean I can't go home. My mom is the teacher; she's gonna be there, right? And so we'll
Right.
stay there at 5, and from 5 we'll go to the church, and then we'll
Mm.
trek like another 45 minutes to the church from where we were, from my primary school, and then we'll go to church. And then the church, Mondays, it's prayer meeting. Tuesday is women's meeting. And because we're always, mostly my dad has gone to work in the morning. And
Mm.
Mondays was prayer meeting. Tuesdays was women's meeting. Wednesday was Bible study. Nothing happened on
Mm.
Thursday. Friday we had videos. And we did this like all day, every day,
Wow.
And then once we are done from, the church by 8, we will trek for an hour 10 or an hour 15 minutes back home. And so we'll get home like maybe 9:15. And that's when we'll do
Mm.
the homework. And then we'll go and eat. We don't eat until like maybe 10:30, 11. And then the cycle continues again. At some point, I remember that I hawked pepper.
Mm.
At some point, I hawked soap that my dad would produce.
Mm.
I don't eat okra today because I think I've eaten the ones that would last me a lifetime when growing up. We had all the varieties of okra soup. The regular okra soup with the stew on it, the
Yeah.
ones they would call it lase, but like we had all the varieties of okra soup. And so the moment I could say no more okra because I think I had the ones that would last me 2 lifetimes. So,
Mhm.
but what was your, experience like
Yeah.
growing up? And again, if you can remember one of your fondest memory growing up.
Mm.
I know Ilupeju very well. I know
Mm.
Muslim very well. I know Shodi very well.
Mm.
Ilupeju, some people will say is an upscale part of Lagos. You cannot,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, somebody living in Igondo would, if you say you
Mm.
live in Ilupeju, they'll tell you, "You're a big boy. What are you talking about?" And somebody in
Mm.
Surulere will look at you and be like, "This one is a poor boy." Somebody in Lekki will
Mm.
say you're a poor boy. So it depends. So when you're saying you
It's
are living in
relative.
Ilupeju, I'm like, what is he talking about? So tell us, what your that growing up was like.
Right. No, you are right. Wealth is relative, right?
Sure.
It is relative. So, like you rightly said, look where you compare to Igondo. It's like you are living in, you're a big boy, right? So, well, for me, growing up was really rough. Living on one income, I saw my mom, worked, she overworked,
Hmm.
to take care of 5 kids. My mom was working first shift, you know, as a nurse. So that means we have to wake up early when she was leaving. My mom's hospital at the time was somewhere around Oshodi, Bolade
Yeah.
area
Okay.
of Oshodi. And we were living in Ilupeju. So by the time I got to secondary school, my older brother and I were in the same school. So both of us had to leave the same time my mom was leaving
Leaving
super
for
early
work.
in the morning you know. So my mom had to lap me, and then somebody would lap my brother.
Here's a
That's
friend in
how.
need of lap for
Yes.
for
So
Gen
that
Zs
means
and these
somebody
new
carry
kids or people
you.
living for people living in America, my let's know what
They
does
would not
lap mean
understand. Yeah, what's that, right? So that means when you enter public transportation, because you could not afford to pay
for
for
another
your
seat,
seat,
another spare seat
you know yeah, so somebody had to carry you,
on their
so you
laps.
would have to on their laps, so you wouldn't have to worry about paying, and that's how my mom saved money on transportation for us, and then we'll make somebody to lap my brother, for us to get to school. in the morning. And then on our way back from school, the railway line from Oshodi. So I went to Estate Grammar School right there, the out of Oshodi, the roundabout. There is a school there called Estate Grammar School.
Okay.
It used to be, I mean, it's still a good school. A lot of rich kids went there, like you said, Ilopeju, relatively wealthy. So a lot of Obey's kids, Ebenezer
Oh, yeah.
Obey kids, Tolu Obey and Pastor Folari. They were my senior in secondary school. Tolu that now sings, it was my 4 year senior, So then when we finish around 2:30, 3 o'clock, then we have to trek from the railway line. The railway line from Oshodi will take you all the way to Ilopeju area, right? So we trek from Kappa, I was still discussing this with my friend in Germany, the other day. We would trek from Oshodi, then we get to Kappa, then Kappa to Ilopeju roundabout or thereabout, and then everybody start branching, into their streets, from there to save money, right? And so because you all that you had was, lunch money. That's all your parents would give you. And so we have to trek, so that was part of growing up for me. But I also said, look, in all of that mega resources, I was also blessed with a lot of people around me, that made it look like we had a lot, right? For instance, I mentioned Dr. Dudubon. So Dr. Dudubon's dad, they were wealthier. So the dad would put him in upscale after school lessons somewhere around Pangrove.
Okay.
Well, my parents couldn't afford that, so the man would pay
Oh,
for me
wow.
as well to go
Oh,
with
wow.
Wale to those type of upscale where there's AC. When other kids were going to, curricular activities, this man put Wale and I in a very upscale, extracurricular class somewhere in Pangrove. That's the kind of place, kids of privilege, kids who are privileged will go to. So that's part of, growing up for me. But the fondest memory for me really was going to my parents' hometown during the holidays to go to the farm with my uncles.
Okay.
I look forward to the end of the semester where I will go to Ijebu and go spend 2 months with my uncle.
So you
My dad,
enjoy spending time in the rural
I
part
loved it.
than being in the city.
I loved going to the village. I enjoyed it.
Oh, wow.
That was, I think, the fondest. I mean, I still remember, going there. So you will go, the town itself is Ishara. Then they have, village outside of Ishara where my uncles, they would spend like 3 weeks over there and then come back and spend 1 week, there in Ishara. So spending 3 weeks in the village and then my entire, end of the semester, I spent it there until a week before school will resume.
Resumption.
Then I come back to Lagos. So I really enjoy spending time in the village with my uncle and my cousins. You get to swim in the village stream. You get to roast the corn. You just flog them and, roast them. We go hunting. I
Oh,
really
wow.
enjoy that. And then we have to walk kilometers. And I think the reason looking back now, I learned the value of hard work, doing that with my uncle and my cousins, because these individuals would trek kilometers and they have to carry everything in their head back to the village. And we do this every day. And that's hard work, that I did not get the opportunity to learn in Lagos. And so going to the village, going to Ijebu to spend time with my uncles and my cousins really opened my eyes to see those kind of opportunities that I never saw in Lagos. And I really enjoyed, that. And of
That's
course,
good.
he also make me well grounded, to understand the root, the source, where I came from. And even till today, I identify with that part of my, my root, my source. So I think those are the kind of memories. And of course, my uncles also, I remember growing up, we call them uncles, but we are not blood related,
Um,
right? But we were neighbors, but you will never know that we're not related.
hmm.
So these two individuals, growing up, I remember these two vividly, and I will never forget because this is part of my story. that made me who I am today by the grace of God. So during the holidays, whenever I was in Lagos, these two guys, one of them is actually a physics teacher. I eventually became a principal of Victory College in Lagos, Ikeja, Victory College in Ikeja, Mr.
Okay.
Diyemi. Mr. Diyemi will give you assignment in the morning. And then Mr. Retade, my other uncle, for you to play draft, Monopoly, or Scrabble when you return in the evening, you have to show him what you have done, during the day, because school is out, it's holiday. What qualifies you to play Monopoly, Scrabble, or even draft with Uncle Shoga in the evening? You have to show him what you have done.
Done during the
The
day.
reading and the math assignment Mr. DME gave you in the morning. That's how I grew up, having the community. It's not just your parents, but the community. It takes a village, right? They say, to raise a child. And I think growing up, people around me demonstrated that. And that's part of why I said in the intro that I received grace and favor.
Awesome. 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 Now it looks like I'll take, this question from what you mentioned the other time that, one of the things you love to enjoy or that you love to do was when you're on holiday was going to, the village to, spend your holidays, that you always looked forward to that. Today, though, outside of work, what else do you like to do for fun? Yeah, we know that you're a doctor, you probably have crazy work schedules, but how do you balance that out? What do you do for fun today when you're not working?
Right. And so, they say that, work and no play make Jack a dull boy, right? So we have to find a balance, most especially for your mental health. I tell people all the time, you are working with individuals, who have, mental health challenges. And so you are pouring yourself into treating those individuals. And so you have to figure out ways to, pour back into yourself when you are not working. And so when I'm not, in my clinic, so what I typically do is I love to read. And I love to read books, non-academic, and sometimes academic books. And then I love to watch Nigerian movies. So my wife, I think she initiated me into that, into watching Nigerian movies. So she will select movies for us to watch during the weeknights and weekends.
Okay.
And that's how I typically spend my time off work, and of course, spending time with my kids,
Okay.
making sure that I'm present when I'm home, with my kids. So
Okay.
that's pretty much, what I do. I love watching the news, but the last couple of years, I stay away from the news because it becomes a little bit toxic. And so, but prior to all these issues going on in the US and all of that, I used to watch a lot of news. I think I watch a lot of news.
Okay.
But now I just, I'm watch Nigerian movies and read books if I can and spend time with the kids.
Awesome. 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 You mentioned, a little bit about your upbringing, how that you were, born and raised in, Lagos, Nigeria. At what point did you immigrate to the US? And what was
Mm.
that process like? When, if it makes sense to actually, mention the year too, it will be helpful.
Right. Right. So I came to the United States in 2003, September. I left Lagos September 20, and I arrived here in Oklahoma September 21st of 2003. So I've been here now for a minute, and the process for me. Again, grace and favor. I did not come here as an international student. I came here with green card, you know, miraculously. And so I think that helped with the transition. But I wouldn't say that it was easy because, I was not born here. I didn't know anyone in Oklahoma per se. It was when I got here that people connected me with few people that I today call family, So, moving to a place where you did not know or have any family members, and trying to start all over again, so the transition was a little bit challenging,
Let's start.
trying to find
Sorry to
jobs.
cut you. Let's start from the point where you were in Nigeria.
Hmm.
So that can give, the listeners or, the watchers of this some context. At what
Yeah, right.
age, where were you at that time? It
Mm.
doesn't have to be, you know, At what age were you, out of secondary school? Were you in the
Mm.
university? At what
Right.
points? That could give context to say, hey,
Right.
if you were a little younger, it probably would be
Mm.
more concerning to figure out how you're able to settle. If you were way
Right.
older, maybe it probably would have been easier. So, what stage were
Mhm.
you at before
Right.
you moved here?
Right. So I was a student at the University of Lagos,
Oh, okay.
when I came to the US. I think I was 23, I think going on 24. No, I was 24 going on 25,
Okay.
when I got here. Yeah, I was 24 going on 25. So I was not a teenager, I was not, super old either, so you consider that mid 20s, when I landed here in Oklahoma. And so and having green card, made the journey a little bit easier because then you could work, you could go to school, right? Because you had the document to be able to do
All
any
of
of
that.
those,
Right.
and so I'm grateful. So I'm not complaining at all because I had the opportunity to be able to get a job. I had the opportunity to be able to go to school without paying international student fees or worry about how am I going to pay this. I mean, you could get a loan because you had a green card, but that does not necessarily mean that the transition was that easy because you didn't know anyone here, so you have to figure all of that out for yourself. I had to figure out where to live. I had to figure out jobs. I had to figure out schooling because my number one goal was to continue my education when I arrived. So I had to figure that out. No one was there to hold my hand and be like, hey, you have to apply for this, FAFSA, for instance. Nobody told me about that. I had to learn, about FAFSA myself. Nobody told me about, different type of colleges that, maybe you should try from community colleges a little bit cheaper. I learned about all those things along the way, right? So those are the kind of things, trying to figure out what kind of job, you're going to do, what kind of job will, work well with my school schedule. I had to figure all of that out, myself.
You were still
Yes.
a young person. I mean, at 25, your brain is probably still developing.
Hmm.
But you were old enough to still be accustomed to certain cultures and traditions of the Nigerian society.
Right.
What would be your biggest culture shock when you moved out here that made you feel like, what am I, that it shocked you the most and was like, how am I going to live in this society? What would you, describe as your biggest culture shock?
You're right. So for me, there were a lot of them, really, but I don't think they were negatives for me because,
Okay.
like, you said 25, before I left Nigeria, I watched a lot of news, so I knew, what the society was like. Of course, I never lived there, but I watched a lot of CNN, so I knew, what I was going into. So it wasn't really shocking in a negative way. I think for me, the cultural shocks were more in a positive light in terms of, be like, wow, look at how the system works. Look at how the system functions. How do you take advantage of this to better your life, right? Now, Oklahoma, 22, 23 years ago, even till now, some individuals, they struggle to accept people who look like me. So I was shocked when I experienced, some form of subtle racism. You know, that was a little bit shocking. And so that would be a cultural shock too, because people treated you differently because of how you look,
I
you know,
mean, you,
because
pro-
of your race.
you probably didn't know that you were black until you got here.
Exactly. People put that in your face, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the truth. I mean, a lot of people actually would explain to you that we just thought this was normal, back at home,
Hmm.
and then you get
Right.
somewhere, and then it began to dawn on you that look, some people believe you don't belong in
Hmm.
certain environments, or you don't, you're lesser than what you're currently
Right.
doing, and they will treat you as such. For
Right.
me, I would say that one of my very first culture shocks was the fact that when I came out here, the very first month, I used to, I owned a few businesses back at home. I drive and all of that stuff. And then I moved out here. I really didn't know. I had come on vacation like two, three different times. But, every time we came on vacation, we're always, Ubering because it was just like 2 weeks. We Uber around. We had friends who would pick us up and drop us off at, different places. But when I moved here, one of the challenges I, experienced was the timing for the buses. If, you wanted to save cost and you had to go somewhere, it was
Yeah.
totally different. I mean, if you were going to board Uber to take you from point A to point B, and it was going to take
Yeah.
you 15 minutes, if you were taking a public bus, it probably would take you 2 hours.
Absolutely.
It would take you two
Yeah.
hours if you were taking a
Yes.
public bus. For that same journey, that would take you 15
Yes.
minutes if you were driving. It was
Yes.
shocking to me.
Yes.
And we don't have
And then waiting
bikes.
for your bus during the winter.
Yeah, we don't have bikes that you say, "Oh, let me take this bike, and I
Yeah.
can go somewhere." It was pretty that system was crazy to me. And if you missed your bus, you probably had to wait another 45 minutes. You
Right.
probably had to wait another hour, depending on
Mm-hmm.
where you're going. And God help you
Right.
if you lived in cities like Maryland where buses are not everywhere. You probably would get a bus somewhere and then take a train from that point
Right.
to another place and then take another bus. It was crazy. And so that was pretty shocking to me. Another thing that was shocking to me was seeing everyone carry a weapon or a gun.
Mm.
And you hear things like, "Well, I have the license to carry." License
Mm-hmm.
to carry or no license to carry. It was a strange sight to me.
Mm.
Seeing, everybody. It's either there's a word that's used that you can conceal carry or it's
Yes.
non-conceal carry. That was strange. It was a strange sight. I still don't understand the concept today because
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking why is everybody carrying a gun? Why do you
Right.
need a gun? It was a pretty strange sight to me. So those two things, amongst other things, were cultural shocks,
Right.
for me. So it's nice hearing you share. So how did you transition into the society? Someone who's never been in the US before, you moved from Nigeria and then you got here and then you're trying to figure things out. Can you explain the first three things that you thought, were pretty most important for you to do to help you quickly settle? And if those three things still would hold or would stand true today for the
Mm.
new waves of immigrants that we're having, should they, do those first three things? What would you say
Right.
are the first three things that you did that helped you quickly settle down?
Right. Yeah. No, it's very important. So before I left Nigeria, so I knew, of course, I was coming to Oklahoma City. So, of course, there was internet then. There was already internet. So I Googled Redeemed Christian Church of God. I was not a Redeemed member, but I knew Redeemed would be everywhere. So I Googled Redeemed and then I found Pastor Shanusi in Houston. So my sister lives in Houston,
Okay.
before I came. So when I Google, I found Pastor Shanusi, then I emailed him. I found his email. So I emailed him that, hey, I will be going to Oklahoma City. Do you know any pastor there in Oklahoma City? Because I knew the importance of community, right? It helps you transition. And so it was Pastor Shanusi that actually connected me with Pastor Shalewon before I
Okay.
even left Nigeria.
Okay.
So I got to know about Pastor Shalewon before I
Before
even
you
left
even got
Nigeria.
here.
Yes. And so when I got here in the city, then I reached out to Pastor Shalewon that, hey, I'm here. And then I had the community, right? So then they will, of course, I didn't have a car, I just got here. So Pastor Shalewon will send somebody. I was living on East Side, 58th and Lincoln in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
So Pastor Shalewon will send, somebody from the church. They will pick me up, bring me there, and then after service, they will take me back. So the first thing that to the question, finding a community, and I found a church community.
Awesome. That's the first
That was
thing.
very, yes. And then the second thing for me, I knew all my life, I knew that I wanted to get a PhD. I wanted to be a professor. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so my father has these two friends who are professors, right? They are brothers, Professor Shoyibo, Kola Shoyibo and Doyin Shoyibo. Professor Kola Shoyibo of University of Lagos and Doyin Shoyibo of University of Ibadan. So by the time I came to North America, Professor Kola Shoyibo already transitioned to North America. So I reached out to him that, hey, Daddy, Motidebio, what advice do you have for me in terms of academics? because I knew that's very important to me and I want to get in immediately because I don't want to waste time. You don't want to be distracted with this $13 an hour thing. I knew that's not for me. So I reached out to him immediately and he advised, made suggestions, do ABC, right? Again, that got me settled, in terms of what I needed to do in the areas of academics.
Right.
So now I got the church community, right? I got the academic, support, from Professor Kola Shoyibo, may God rest his soul. That's the second thing, because I knew, I wanted to do that. And of course, the third thing that I think is very important, many of us, when we leave home, we disconnect from people back home. I think that's a mistake.
Right.
Don't do that. We still need people back home, right? And so the third thing for me was the life wire back home, the connection with my church family back home, with my friends back home, staying in contact because this place can be very lonely.
Very true.
This place, if you are not careful, you just be depressed, But having connection with the people back home, even when you were lonely, you're talking to your people, your brothers, your siblings, your parents, your friends, your church community, that kept me going. And so then you ask, would these three things would still be relevant to an individual who is arriving today? I believe so, 100%. You need a church. If you are a Christian, if you are a Muslim, the same. You need your Asalato community. Need people that will hold you accountable, right? And that's what Professor Shoyubo did for me. He held me accountable on my doctoral journey or my academic journey because I knew that's very important to me. And of course, you still need people back home, even if they're not going to be sending you money, they can provide advice and they can help you when you are lonely. So those are the
Awesome.
three things that I think helped me, in my journey.
Awesome. So I'll take the educational part. You said that you were already in the University of Lagos at the time when you were transitioning, in here. And
Right.
when you got here, what course were you studying in the University of Lagos? And did you continue that course or do you just, change to something entirely different? And what was the
I
reason
changed.
if you changed what?
Yeah. See, my academic journey has been a very challenging one for me, right? So I actually started off from the University of Ilorin. That was 1997, 98, when I got into Ilorin. And I was studying physics engineering,
Okay.
And I made some poor decisions in Ilorin that got me kicked out, from the University of Ilorin. And so I came back home to Lagos. So when I was a science student, so I've always wanted to be an engineer. That's what I wanted to do initially. And so when I left University of Ilorin, it was that morning I will never forget leaving campus. So I was in Deeper Life. I went to Deeper Life. So I was Deeper Lifer. So, and then I also attended Deeper Life Campus Fellowship. And so when I was leaving campus that morning, coming back to Lagos, I was having my quiet time and it was very clear, what the Lord spoke to me that morning. And so then I got back to Lagos based on that instruction from my quiet time that morning that I needed to switch my major. We call it major in America. So I had to go back and do SS, WAEC. I mean, what do you call it? Not
Why?
WAEC.
Or NECO?
GC,
Oh,
no
GC. Okay.
GC.
Okay.
There was no NECO in my time, So, so I had to go do GC because all I did was physics, chemistry, further math, and I needed to switch. So I had to go do GC, to do commercial, economics, government, and all those things. And by the grace of God, the Lord helped me. I got that taken care of. And then I used that result now to do another jam. And then I picked University of Lagos. I wanted to study economics and things like I just eventually along the way developed interest in that. But my cutoff would not get me to economics. So I eventually got to philosophy at the University of Lagos.
Okay.
So I was studying philosophy at the University of Lagos, Professor, what's the name? Mamalawu that passed recently. Those are some of my professors there. I can't remember a lot of these folks anymore. Professor Sophie Oluwole, Professor Sophie Oluwole, the first woman professor, the first female to have a PhD in philosophy in Africa. Sophie Oluwole was in my department. And so I was doing philosophy. And then when I got here, Then I'm like, okay, what exactly do I want to do? Do I want to go back to my sciences because I could do that? And so I said, you know what? No, I wanted economics and international relations because at this point, I said, I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to solve economics problem for the developing countries. So when I got to America, then I started majoring in economics and international relations. So
Okay.
my bachelor degree in America was actually in economics and international relations. That's what I did. And God really helped me. I graduated top of my class. In Nigeria, they would call it first class. Here we call it summa cum laude. So I graduated summa cum laude, which, will be first class in Nigeria parlance. And so with that, then I said, I wanted to further. I knew I wanted a PhD. And so then in my undergrad, I was introduced to orthodox economics by one of my professors from Iran, Professor Shah Mohammed, at UCO in Edmond, University of Central Oklahoma.
Okay.
So I got so, invested in orthodox economics that I'm like, man, I wanted to be like Karl Marx. I just love, it makes sense to me coming from
The
Nigeria.
background.
Some of these things make sense to me. And then I said, I needed to do something first before going to do that. So I went to do my master's in finance. So I got an MBA finance, and then I started my PhD in New York in economics. I was doing orthodox, PhD economics in New York. And I got tired of it. And I think I went on what they call leave of absence from
Sabbatical.
economics. Yes, yes. And then when I returned back to Oklahoma, then my father-in-law asked me, what are you going to do now? You're just going to sit down home, do nothing. So I said I was still trying to figure this out. But meanwhile, before I went to do my PhD economics, I was working in corporate America. I was in mortgage banking with my finance degree. But I just got tired of that kind of life. I didn't feel like it didn't fit my um
Your
how I see
personality.
myself, I didn't really fit all of that for me. And so then my father-in-law told me about psychology, that, hey, the way I see you, I think you'll be a good psychologist, So I'm like, okay, well, what's that? That's when I check it out. Then I went to OU to do another master's in psychology. And I love it. I'm like, wow, this is me. This is really what I wanted to do. And so I fell in love. And then with economics, economics, there's something we call behavioral economics, which is still psychology, So I'm like, oh, I can actually match my
Goes
economics and
together.
psychology and do industrial and organization psychology PhD. So I don't lose my economics completely and then still do a little bit of psychology. And so, but then along the way, I fell in love with clinical, and that's where I went to do my PhD in clinical psych as opposed to industrial psych. And that's the journey from physics engineering to philosophy to economics, finance, and now clinical psych.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, I know that as, adjunct professor that you are, and with the other side of business that you also do, I feel that you work with a lot of young people today. What are the challenges that you think that, younger folks or the younger generation face today? For example, I know that there's some sort, it's not really pronounced, but it's there. There is some sort of, drug epidemic. Around the world. It has nothing to do with any part of it. It's in the US, it's in Nigeria, it's in Canada, it's everywhere
It is.
where there's an abuse of drug usage and facing the younger generation. And sometimes the older folks too abuse it, and it's things that have been happening since the maybe 70s. But this today, I think it's a little worse because you just see 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, abusing all kinds of drugs. In Nigeria, there are different kinds. I was watching a video one day and then I saw one with the balloon. I'm like, so we have to be scared of, the balloon now with kids, So how do young people overcome the temptation of falling into that trap?
No, you are right. It's an epidemic all over the world. Even in Nigeria, I was supposed to be on the show on TVC in Lagos 2 years ago when I visited to talk about that. And I consult with some individuals in Nigeria, about what you just, mentioned. So it is a problem. It is a problem here in America. It is a problem in Nigeria. It is a problem all over the world, with young people and drugs. The question is this: why? Right? So see, young people, I tell people, you see, you've been a 15-year-old before, you've been 14-year-old before, you've been 16-year-old before, right?
Mhm.
And you're trying to figure things out,
Right.
right? And so in the process of trying to figure things out, we listen to our friends more than we listen to our parents. And then along the way, the peer pressure, young people, into drugs. But the underlying problem is actually childhood trauma, for a lot of these young people. And I tell people this, and I'm very frank about this, that if you are in your 40s now or close to 50, my generation,
Mhm.
so I'm close to 50 now, you've been traumatized living in Nigeria and things have not changed. We grew up during the time of June 12th, 93 election.
Right.
That's when I was growing
Mhm.
up. And I saw people killed in Lagos, Ikorodu Road. That's trauma. Oh, that's trauma for the young brain, right? And the young brain is trying to figure this out, is trying to understand what has just happened to him, right? And then in the process of trying to understand and navigate this traumatic experience,
Mhm.
people try to numb, right? You trying to push it, you trying to repress it. And one of the things that help people repress their trauma is drugs,
Mm.
right?
Right.
It's drugs, right? People just trying to, young people, when I ask them, little Johnny, I call all my little kids that I work with little Johnny. Little Johnny will say, Dr. Yemi, you don't get it. This helped me to calm because what trauma does is this. I call it 3 Fs, right? Fight, flight, and freeze. As a matter of fact, I just added additional two based on research. Food and the F word, promiscuity, right? The F word that we don't say, right? These are trauma responses. So now let's pick the fight. What Little John is trying to say is this: Dr. Yemi, when I smoke weed, it calms me that I'm less irritable and then I'm not fighting on the street. And because I'm not fighting, no one is arresting me.
You're not
Nobody is
in
calling the
trouble.
cops on me. Exactly. And so young people, they're trying to understand that part, and drugs help them, in that regard, right? And for those who are using some other, drugs like meth, right? It makes them to be more, sexually active. And how do you explain, a 16-year-old, 15-year-old kid who already has two kids?
That's shocking to me when I moved out here. There is a lot of that
Absolutely. How do you explain that? That a 16-year-old, that's a child, and that child already has,
as a child. In fact,
kids.
children.
Yes. And not just one, because if it's one, you will say, okay, it's an
It's a
accident, right?
mistake, yeah.
But two, two, that's no longer, a mistake.
True.
That's intentional,
Hmm.
right? And so how do you explain that? These are trauma responses. And that's why it looks like even in Nigeria, we have this epidemic as well, because there's a lot of trauma that is going on. Sexual abuse. We push this under the rug. We don't talk about it, even within families, right? That's a kind of treatment that I provide here. We call it problematic sexual behavior here in the United States, right? Where siblings perpetrate on another sibling, right? What do you think that victim would do, right? They will react and then trying to numb their experiences. Some of them will go to drugs. Some of them will start, prostituting. Some of them will start doing all manner of things. And so the underlying factor that we need to address from my clinical experience is trauma.
Right. Okay.
And then, look, you cannot dissociate completely the role of poverty also. And that's part of what I do with the government of Oklahoma here in the area of policy to be like, okay, how do we address, disparity, socioeconomic disparity, economic disparity, medical disparity? How do we address this as a nation, as a society, as a state.
Right.
Because what we found based on where you fall, on that
The scale.
socioeconomic spectrum, right? That determines the type of drugs you use.
So if you can afford more, you use. Wow.
Yeah, it's a function of economics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Wow.
That never occurred to me.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a function of economics. Look at the Black community; they use different type of drugs than white community. So it is about money. It's about economics.
However, the underlying factor still remains the same.
It's the same. It's only that some people can afford some people can afford this type, right? And that's why you see that some people get in trouble for this type, and some people get away with this type, right? But the underlying principle is the trauma, the abuse, the poverty, abject poverty, because there is abject poverty too in America.
Can you spend a minute to describe what that looks like? Because sometimes when you speak to people that are back home about, some of the things that, you have experienced here, people just assume what you're saying is fiction. I mean, the US that we see on the TV is not. What are you talking about? So from your own lens, can you describe what that abject poverty looks like? I know,
Yes,
but there are hundreds
yes.
of thousands of people that are going to watch this clip and then they have no idea what that looks
Right.
like.
Absolutely. I work with marginalized kids, kids who are coming from a very, very poor home. Some of these kids now it's about to be very cold here in America. Some of the kids I work with, most especially when I work for the state of Oklahoma, many of those kids, they have no heat.
At home.
So at home during winter, yes. In America, yes. Many of these kids that I work with, through the state of Oklahoma, many of them have roaches everywhere in their homes. Many of these kids that I work with have no bedding.
What?
In America, yes. And that's why many of those kids, when they get to juvenile prison, they will tell you that this place is better. At least I have a bed.
My God.
You see what I'm saying?
So some of them
Many
would
of the
even
kids,
intentionally get into trouble just to leave that
yes,
environment. Oh, wow.
yes. Many of the kids that I work with in juvenile would tell me that, Dr. Yemi, I would rather stay here because you guys going to feed me 3 days, 3 times a day. I have my own room. So the kids will intentionally, when it's time for them to be discharged, they will intentionally get in trouble so they don't go home.
You see,
because there is no home to go to.
It's funny that we're having this conversation. And because when I moved to the US, I had been threatened by a 13-year-old with a gun before in DC. And
Wow.
it made no sense to me. It made zero sense to me that a 13-year-old, there were a couple of kids that were also arrested, I think in 2021, about 4 of them. None of them was over the age of 12. And they were carjacking. They were stealing cars. You'll park your car at the gas station, you're trying to fill the gas, and then they get in there and then they zoom away with your car. And then they'll go on high-speed chase with the police.
Yep.
It made zero sense to me. And sometimes it's easier for us to come and judge people if you really don't understand where they are coming from.
You've never lived in their shoes. That's why I tell people all the time, look, if you've never walked in these people's shoes, you are not in any position to judge. Just be quiet, because you don't know. Look, I work with kids that will say, Dr. Yemi, look, single parents home. By the way, research supports all that I'm saying. Okay. Many of these kids are coming from a single parent home, right? Now imagine a single mother trying to raise 5 kids, 6 kids, right? She has to work because she just make $1 more to qualify for benefit. Just $1 more. $1 knocks her out to qualify for benefits. Now she has 6 kids to feed, 6 kids to cater for. Now she has to work. She has 2 dead end jobs. She comes back home 9, 10 p.m. Little Johnny comes back from school 3:30. Mom not home, right? Well, big brother in the community comes and be like, hey, I can provide protection for you and your family. You just need to do ABC for me. And that's how they get these kids into gang banging. And the kid that has already been traumatized, the kid that is coming from abject poverty, and you offer him protection, what do you think that kid is going to do? You offer him Coke, a bottle of Coke. You offer him snacks. What do you think little Johnny would do? So in order for us not to, overflog the situation, what would you say is the easy way out? Because the truth of the matter is,
there are kids who, fall victim to, all of these challenges. And there are
Right.
also kids who are raised in the same environment but turned out differently.
Yeah.
What is that thing that has to be done to
Mm.
make our kids turn out differently?
Right.
What would you say would be that turning point that each kid that is in that situation has to
Mm.
experience that would make them intentionally just decide that, look, I want to be a different person. I want to be a changed
Yeah.
person. Because I meet with people who have, I work with people too. I meet, and some of them, were raised in, almost the same environment, but it
Mm.
turned out great. They turned out well.
Absolutely.
Some people, met some people who, just mentored them.
Mm.
And, some people met other people that, housed them, clothed them, showed
Right.
them the way. At what point, what has to be done to,
Mm.
bring about a positive change?
Yeah. Yeah. You raise a good point. Two people can, you can raise two kids in the same environment
Uh-huh.
and they turn out differently.
Very true.
Two kids can experience the same trauma. As a matter of fact, the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, right? The Attorney General, the state of Michigan, at some point, I don't know if he's the current Attorney General now, his brothers were in prison. Okay. His brothers, they grew up in the same home, same trauma, they experienced the same thing. Two brothers, they eventually went to prison and then he became the Attorney General of the state of Michigan.
Wow.
Same trauma. So how do you explain that, right? Every individual is different, right? Now, there is something we call positive youth development, right? It is
Okay.
about how the brain functions, how the brain works, right? Understanding the way the brain works for young people, right? Maturity always set in,
Mm.
right? For all of us. And we know, most especially for boys, for men, we have delay development, right?
Very true.
The brain does not fully develop for us compared to our counterparts,
Uh-huh.
right? But at some point, it develops and it becomes full development, right?
Right.
And when it becomes full development, that's when we say maturity set in, right? Like Apostle Paul says, when I was a baby, I
Yeah,
act like a baby, right? But when you don't drink milk anymore because now you mature, right? And so when maturity set in, people say, you know what, I can't do that anymore. That's not for me. I can't gang banging anymore. Drugs is not doing anything for me. But before then, the society has a responsibility.
Okay.
Before then, the family unit has a responsibility. There is a psychologist from Sweden called Von from Brennan, right? It actually gave us this theory that we use. I use it when I work for the state of Oklahoma, right? It talks about systems, right? There are different systems, and each of those systems have to meet young people where they are in terms of interventions, right? You have what it called the, primary, unit, the family. You have the school, right? The school has a responsibility, right? Then you have the larger society, what do you call it? The larger scale, right? The state, the federal government, they also have responsibility. And for state, for example, what are we doing to address the issue of abuse within the family
The
setting?
family unit.
You see what I'm saying? Because look, we already have the data. I mean, I work for the state for almost 10 years. We have data from when that child was born. We've been collecting data. We know that this kid, if nothing is done now, in the next 15 years, this is what the outcome will look like for this kid. You can predict it
You can
accurately.
predict that?
Accurately, we can. Accurately, we can. We have the data that if nothing is done now, in the next 15 years, from the one that this kid was born, if nothing is done in terms of intervention, we can accurately predict what outcome would look like in the next 15 years for that kid. We
What
have
are
the
the
data.
what are the behavioral markers that you look out for? Because what you're saying to me is strange. I know it's true,
Absolutely.
but what are the behavioral
Absolutely.
markers that you look out for that
You're right.
can allow you predict that kind of outcome?
Right. Well, even without behavioral, even income itself is a data point. When the mom comes to collect WIC, the food and the milk they they get, as part of the benefit. That's a
Yeah.
data.
Wow.
That is already telling us something what outcome can look like for that child in the next 15 years. That is already telling me what housing will look like for that child in the next 10 years.
So,
That
doctor,
is
why is
already
it that we're
telling
not
me.
having a whole conversation around this thing? Because look, most times when conversations around certain communities is had,
Right.
we attack that conversation emotionally, not with this kind of data that you're explaining. Because I think if someone who is knowledgeable in this field like yourself comes out to debunk a lot of the myths and really explain some of these things, maybe we can begin to have actionable points to begin to execute, to implement and curb this. But
Right.
what we have today is we just have a number of people go online and then we rant and everybody supports or opposes. And, whoever has a loudest voice will probably
Right.
be online. And then the conversation goes to sleep.
Right.
But
I- I-
I'm hearing
I-
things now that I think that if we pay attention to, might be able to help us solve the larger part of this problem.
Right. To be fair, right? To be fair, that's part of what I did when I was in government, right? When I worked with the government, that's part of my job, right? Using this data, to change policy. That's part of what I did, when I was the chief of psychology for the Office of Juvenile. That's part of what we did. And in fairness to our governor, he really listened. And my boss at the time, they listen, they believe in data, and we use the data to implement policy and change a whole lot of things, a lot of interventions for marginalized communities, because we know we have this data. We cannot, numbers don't lie, data don't lie. We know, right? Now, this is the problem, right? Now, government cannot solve all the problems in the
True,
world.
true.
Government cannot. I mean, say I've worked in government. Government cannot. And everyone in government also has different agenda. You need to recognize that, right? So that's where it is important to empower the family unit, right? We need to educate families, on this issue of trauma, and there is something in psychology we call intergenerational trauma pathway, right? See, people will say, but you were not a slave, it was your ancestors that were slaves. So why are you still acting this way? If you understand fully well what intergenerational trauma pathway means, you will not be saying that. You see what I'm saying? I don't have to live during the era of slavery for me to inherit the trauma of my ancestors. You see? And so we have to be able to educate our communities about some of these things. We have to be able to educate the families, right, about the implications of many of these things and how they present, how they manifest, right? Somebody that is just angry all the time is not just anger. Trauma shows up that way.
Responsive to something.
Yes, it's just responding to something. So can we educate that person? Because when you are educated about something, then you seek solution before it gets out of hands, before you start looking for drugs, before you start looking for men or women to help you in being promiscuous, right? If we can educate our community, educate the families, and then empower them, because there's little to nothing government can do in some cases, and so I believe these are some of the things we can do. And of course, the young people themselves also have to be educated, about some of their symptomatology. And by the way, some of these symptoms look differently for Black people. Some of these symptoms look differently for Asians, right? So we have to be able to educate them, because if I'm using the white standard, you may miss it for an African American person, for instance, you see. And that's why it is very important for us as a people, to educate ourselves and understand the way many of these things manifest, right? And then address the issue of disparity in income and access, and then the myth, around mental health. Black people everywhere think it's a weakness. Yes.
I love this conversation. And honestly, we're going to take a whole day having this conversation because I'm learning a whole lot of things right now. But for the sake of time, let's talk a little bit about mental health. What does that really mean? For some people, it's just some grammatical word or verbiage.
Yeah.
Some people use mental health as a means to escape accountability.
Yeah.
Some people have no idea what mental health is. They just lie about it. They just throw
Mm.
the words around.
Yeah.
Because you're a specialist in this, can you
Mm.
educate us what mental health really is?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you are right. Some people use it to escape accountability, most especially young people, and I hear this a lot from folks that work with young people, but they are not, psychologists or anything like that. You know, people come to me all the time, like, Dr. Yemi, you are just cutting this case slack, with all this, your diagnosis, for these young people. But your question, right? So you think in terms of overall well-being, right? So think about my overall well-being. There are other components of that are not visible. If you have headache right now, you can tell me exactly where you're having the ache, right? If you have backache, you can say it's lower, it is upper back, right? You can pinpoint. But there are other parts of our health that are not visible, and mental health happens to be one of those. And that's what makes it sometimes difficult. Because if you are depressed, for instance, right, some people don't even know that what they're experiencing is depression,
Depression.
because it's not like headache. It's not like you broke your arm, right, that you can see, oh, that is broken, right? And some people are hallucinating, right? Psychosis. And people will say that the Holy Spirit is talking to them, trying to just spiritualize it away. But these sometimes are severe mental illnesses.
Mm.
And so mental health is part of our overall well-being. It's part of your physical health. It's part of your social wealth, and of course, it's part of your medical. It's the entire component of your well-being. And if that is compromised, then we say that you are being challenged with your mental health.
So, for me to visit a doctor,
Mm,
there are markers, there are
mm,
things that I see that
mm.
makes me feel I think I need to go visit the doctor.
Yes.
I'm unnecessarily tired. Some
Mm,
things, I see change in, my body, and then I
mm,
feel this is not normal. I need to go
right,
see the doctor.
mm,
Can you, for the sake of time, just mention, I know we cannot use blanket statements, but I mean, we can't touch everything too at the same time. Can you mention three examples of, symptoms that
mm.
people can see and then, might necessarily not be, because until you're diagnosed, you don't know.
Right. That's right.
But these are like markers that you can actually see that can give you, insights into maybe go visit the doctor for diagnosis or go check yourself. Can you
Right.
mention just three,
Right.
symptoms that, is generally marked with,
Mm,
mental health?
right. So it's difficult to just say three, right? And I will tell you why.
I know.
Because there are different diagnoses.
Right.
Right. But for the sake of simplicity,
Okay.
to make things a little bit easier for our viewers, let's take depression, right? Because
Okay.
that's very common. Or
Okay.
anxiety. We use that word loosely, anxiety or depressed, right? I presented with some folks in Nigeria 2 weeks ago. I had a seminar in Nigeria that I presented at, and we're talking about this, what you just asked, that how do we define this, right? Because we use this word loosely sometimes.
Right.
Oh, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, right? That does not necessarily mean that you have anxiety disorder. I'm depressed, right? That does not necessarily mean that you have major depressive disorder. See, I said disorder,
Mhm.
right? In psychology, we call it abnormal psychology, right? Now, let's take depression. So we say that, look, we have a Bible. We call it DSM-5. That's the Bible we use in psychiatry, diagnosis
Okay.
Bible, right? So to meet the criteria for a diagnosis, some things must be checked, right? So, for example, with depression, you say that you must feel depressed, meaning that you feel hopeless, you feel helpless, right? For 2 weeks straight, 2 weeks straight, almost every day. You just feel sad for no reason and you are hopeless with it. You feel helpless and it happens to you every day for 2 weeks straight. That's one. It's a symptom. And then when you feel that way, you feel like life is no longer worth living. Suicidal ideation, right? It's a symptom, right?
Mhm.
And then things that used to give you pleasure, things that, will give you joy. Like they say, "Oh, Manchester is playing, Arsenal, you will jump up, right? Those things don't excite you anymore,
Anymore.
and for 2 weeks straight, you are not excited, with any of those things any longer. Every day of the week, right? That's a sign. And then
Oh,
you
so,
just feel
wow.
fatigue, right? For Black people, it comes with what we call somatic, right? I'm having headache, I'm having backache, I'm having body aches. Sometimes depression shows up that way for Black
Mm.
individuals, right? After you rule out every medical, variables, right? Could be depression. So those are some of the symptoms, that we look for depression and many other disorders. There are other things that you look at. For Black people, also, it comes with psychosis, hearing voices that are not there,
Mm.
right? Seeing things like
And
spider, yes, hallucination, yes, auditory and visual hallucinations. Depression sometimes, it manifests with psychotic features for Black people. It does not necessarily mean that they have schizophrenia, but Black people have depression with psychotic
can
features.
we bring this home a little bit? And this is interesting to me. And when I'm saying bring it in home, we're both, Nigerian Americans. And as much as we are part of this society, we
Hmm.
are also part of that society. This society has infrastructures in place to take care of a bunch of things that we're
Yes,
talking about.
right.
On the other side, we don't.
With
We attach it to religion. You got to go to church. You got to go for deliverance when situations like that happen.
hmm.
And because I mean, it's a growing economy. It's a growing society. We're
Imagine.
not as old as the U.S. Of course. Our systems are not as old as what is we have here. However, we shouldn't encourage the fact that we overlook a lot of these things. An average person in Nigeria will say, "Well, it's someone that has eaten that will go and see a doctor,"
Hmm.
because we have to pay out of pocket for most of these things.
That's right.
But the problem is there. And
Absolutely.
I'm attached to this because Africa as a continent, I think there is a data that supports this, that I think in the next 10, 15 years would
Hmm.
have the highest number of young people in the world.
Yes, that's right.
And I think that it's something that we should start paying attention to
Hmm.
because we can have the highest number of functional, productive people in the world, and that would encourage or grow the country or grow the
Absolutely.
continent. Or we can
Absolutely.
have the highest number of dysfunctional, drug abusing young population in
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
and it will crumble the economy.
Absolutely.
So, what could have been the strength to build our society would eventually be the reason that kills the society if
Right.
we don't pay attention to this.
Yeah.
However, you made a statement a couple of minutes ago that the government cannot do everything.
No.
What would you say would be the easiest, cheapest way to start solving this problem? Would it be
Right.
awareness? Because one of the problems we have in the Nigerian society, I can't speak for the whole Africa, but for the Nigerian society is that a lot of us live in denial.
Yeah.
These things are there.
Yeah.
We can all see it. Your
Yes.
neighbor, you see it on your street, you see it on your
Absolutely.
drive to work, you see it on the way to church, but you act like it's not there. And when somebody brings it up, instead of you to figure out a way to solve it, you deny it.
Yes. Denier. Yeah.
You deny it, but you still go
Yeah.
back home to it.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
what would you say would be the best way,
Mm.
the cheapest way, the most functional way to start
Yeah.
addressing this issue? Some
Yes.
people, I
No.
mean, from my end,
Yeah. Mm.
I'm not, of course, a professional, I'm not a specialist like you. If you ask me, I probably will say media coverage first. Let's all acknowledge that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And that way we can start figuring out what the solution is. But from
Yes.
your lens as a
Mm.
specialist, what would you say should be the first point of call if we really
Yes.
want to solve this problem?
Right. I think this is very important. This has been something that I've been thinking about, that how do we, with what we now know, right? Because look, Nigeria is still home, right?
Of
God
course.
has helped us. We have America, and I'm grateful for America, but Nigeria is still home for many of us. So how can we take back some of the things we have learned here back home
And
to
implement it at
help,
home.
yes, to help our people? right? And so I think the first thing really is the awareness campaign, right? That look, we have and I was really impressed with the Nigeria Society of Council. I didn't even know they have one until somebody reached out to me and asked if I could come and speak today, right? I didn't even know. So I was really impressed that they even have one, because it starts from something like that, massive campaign, right? Awareness. So they are doing that presently in Nigeria, Lagos chapter, at least I can
Okay.
say, right?
So there,
They are doing that.
in other words, you're saying that there is a school of counselors or like a
Yes.
body for counselors.
They have an association. I was surprised. I didn't know.
Wow. I didn't know too.
Yeah, I didn't know. So I was in Nigeria recently. I just got back 3 weeks ago, and my friend, he has this. He has this thing he does. God has given him this wisdom that he put different professionals together. In Nigeria. So he added me to that group. We met each other while I was in Lagos, and then he introduced me on that platform. That's where somebody saw me. And be like, "How we have this conference? Can you come to talk to us?" I didn't know they have something
Oh
like that
wow. Oh
in
wow.
Nigeria. It was just last week that I spoke to that association in Lagos. But what I'm trying to say in essence is this: awareness campaign, massive campaign, right? This is not going to cost us a whole lot, right, to do some of this, campaign. And then look, we have to ask ourselves, what makes it difficult for people to embrace mental health? Because if we understand what makes it difficult for people to embrace it, that's what we need to tackle, right? And what makes it difficult for people, Black people all over the world, is myth, the
Hmm.
stigma associated with mental health, the stigma that you are crazy to seek help. I tell people, see, we call it disclosure, right? I'm a psychologist and I have a psychologist. I have a psychologist. When I feel overwhelmed, I have a psychologist I talk to, right? But within our community, we see it like a sign of weakness. Going to go talk to somebody, you see a child who is struggling with, learning disability. We see a kid who is autistic, then we label those kids as opposed to understand their struggles, right? We have to remove stigma associated with mental health and disability if we're going to have people come seek help,
Hmm.
right? We have to be able to let people understand that it's actually a strength to seek help and not a weakness, right? See, that would be the second thing. The third thing is this. It's not a spiritual thing, It's not, look, your pastor cannot pray it away.
It's
And I'm a
I'm sorry.
Christian,
I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's just
you
it
know?
I've seen situations where you cannot convince people otherwise, especially where we're from.
Right. They cannot pray it away. I believe in the efficacy of prayers. I know prayer works, but guess what? God gave some people wisdom in the area of psychiatry, right? There are medications. In fact, in medical research, there's something we call effect size. In medical research, that's how effective medicine or treatment is, right? Psychotropic medications, that's what we use to treat mental health conditions, right? We call them psychotropic medications. They have effect size of 0.50. That's 50% effectiveness. Psychotherapy has effect size of 0.45, which is 45% effectiveness. Research shows, medical research, when you combine them, they have effect size of 0.75, 75% effectiveness. That is the highest you can find in medical research treatment. Okay? Who
Hmm.
gave people that wisdom? God. These are not things your pastor can do. See, we have chemicals in the brain, serotonin, right? When you don't have enough of that, you feel depressed. And then we have medication that is making is leaking. That's why you don't have enough. So the medication blocks the leakage and it makes sure
Hmm.
you have the accurate level. That's what
Hmm.
medication does. When you have excess of serotonin, you become psychotic. You begin to hallucinate. And we have medication, we call them antipsychotic,
I will
right?
reduce it.
That will that reduce it to normal level. And then all the psychosis features stop. Prayer cannot do that because what you have is chemical imbalance. You need another chemical to balance it for you. And so as a society, we have to be able to, you know, understand that these are medical conditions. The same way you will go see your doctor when you have cancer, right? let people go see professionals, right? And don't let us try to pray away all these things and try to spiritualize what is not.
Awesome. Awesome. This is an amazing conversation. I just have maybe three more questions. The first would be that I know that you're also a founder. You
Hmm.
co-founded a business in the US. Can you just, in like 1 minute, just talk about that business, what you do, and hopefully maybe, a few people that are looking at this or watching this might, just want to. So this is like an advertorial 1 minute. You introduce what you do and then talk about the advantage of what you do as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have a clinic, my wife and I. My wife's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I'm
Okay.
a psychologist. And so we have a practice together. It's called Better with Psychiatry and Psychological Services here in Oklahoma City. Where we provide mental health services, for individuals in the community. Medication management. So my wife being a psychiatric nurse practitioner, she does medication aspect of our business. And then me being a psychologist, we do psychological testing. For instance, somebody wants to know if they have autism, they have ADHD, they want to do what we call differential diagnosis. I provide all those things. And then I also do what we call competency evaluation for the state of Oklahoma, where, in the United States, before you can go for hearing, trial, you have to be, adjudicated to be competent,
Okay.
So, yeah, so I do that for the state of Oklahoma, that when people have court cases, like they kill somebody, for instance, they have to go see a psychologist to be able to say they are competent or they are not competent. It's a principle in America, so I do those type of things, in our practice. And then of course I provide psychotherapy. Now I was working in government before until May of last year, where my wife was like, you could do so much on your own. The way my wife put it is this: be like, all this you guys, you PhD people, they brainwash you guys to want to work for government when you can be doing your own thing and you have more flexibility. And that really made sense to me, really, when she said that you know what, I could have more flexibility with my time, more time for my kids, more time for my family, and then still be able to do things that I love. Yeah, God has been kind to us, in that area, that, the transition was a little bit smooth, given that we have God in that process with us. So yeah, that's what we do in my clinical setting.
I really didn't know a lot about, the practice also can translate into corporate America until I took a job as a technical product manager with a company
Mm,
that helps hire C-level leadership.
yes.
So we're looking to hire a CEO, a CFO, a CTO, a chairman, whatever. The
Mm,
process of recruitment or hiring is very different. You don't find
yes.
those jobs on job boards. You don't find them
That's
on
right.
LinkedIn. And
That's
so
right.
I, worked with on my team, I think we had like 9 PhD psychologists.
Mm,
And, we would coin behavioral questions, yes, no,
right.
yes, no, yes, no, and then
Right.
translate that, through calculus into
Mm-hmm.
numbers. And then
Yes.
it was a crazy
Yeah.
time of my life. I was like, wait, so this it's not just, diagnosing people with
No.
ADHD and all of that stuff. You can actually predict the
Yeah.
behavioral pattern of
Absolutely.
people
Yep.
by just answering yes, no, yes, no. You can tell if this person has, a leadership traits or how
Yep.
this person will react in certain situations. And it
Yes.
was, it was a good time for me just to learn how that impacts, human
Mm.
resource and,
Yeah.
the process of hiring and good stuff like that.
There are some jobs really that you have to do some testing with a psychologist, to be able to say that you have the trait or not. Like some of those CEOs position, police
Yeah, yeah,
jobs,
yeah, yeah.
some military positions that
I
you have to
didn't
go
know.
through
I
psychologists.
actually didn't know that that was a
Yeah.
thing
Oh yeah.
until
Mm.
it was a good time working there.
It's a very
Um,
broad field.
yes, I agree. Totally, I agree. We have just two more questions.
Mm.
One question is, if you had to recommend a book for our viewers today, what would that book be and why?
Hmm. Yeah, so because so you can tell my specialty is trauma, right? So I work at the VA, right? And I work in their trauma clinic, with the soldiers coming back from war and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a book that I always recommend to my patients. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. The body, it keeps the score. Like in Nigeria, we say, you want to know what score is, right? Yeah, the body keeps the score. Your body keeps the score of your trauma. The title of the book is The Body Keeps the Score, and the author of the book is Bessel van der Kolk. I will spell it.
Okay.
Bessel is Bessel.
Okay.
Bezel. Van, VAN, the DER,
Okay.
and then Kolk, KOLK. And it's an
Okay.
MD, it's a medical doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote that book. It's a very good book. It
Awesome.
simplifies trauma.
Awesome. Final question. If you were to advise your 20-year-old self, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I made some mistakes. I mean, along the way in my area of academics, and but I'm also grateful to God because I learned along the way too. I wish that I actually, just because you are in science class doesn't mean that you have to do engineering, you have to do, go to medical field and all of that, right? I wish that I knew that I didn't have to become an engineer. I didn't have to do engineering just because I studied physics, chemistry, and further math in secondary school, right? I wish that I knew, that there are other things that God has deposited inside of me, to make use of those things to be a blessing to my generation. I wish I knew long time ago. I would have finished with my PhD maybe at the age of 26.
Oh, wow.
So I wish I knew that, right? But I'm also grateful to God that, it happened when the Lord wanted it to happen. But, I think in Nigeria, we just want to force kids to, just because they're in science, that they have to be engineers, they have to be MDs and all of that.
Right.
You don't have to be all of that.
Right.
The Lord can still use you in other areas. But I wish I knew. I wish I was assertive enough to be able to tell my parents that, no, I wanted this route, but I wasn't assertive enough, to convince my parents that I wanted a different route, for myself.
Awesome. Awesome. Wonderful, amazing conversation with you, Doctor. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and explaining. I did learn a lot of things today from this conversation, and sure that would help me make better decisions going forward. So want to really appreciate you making time and, out of your busy schedule to join in this conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our listeners and watchers,
Thank you.
everyone who's watching around the world, if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who needs, encouragement or guidance today. Remember that clarity comes with conversation and purpose grows when we show up. I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much again for joining. Thank you. Appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Bye for now.
Thank you.